The voice message lasted only 23 seconds, but it destroyed the way I looked at my daughter forever. I was standing on my front porch watering my roses when my phone buzzed. I smiled when I saw Vanessa's name, but the moment I pressed play, I heard my daughter whisper, "We need to get mom to sign before she starts asking questions." Then Derek's voice came through cold and sharp. "After the doctor appointment, she'll be easier to control." My hand went numb. The watering can slipped onto the porch, and for the first time in 39 years of being Vanessa's mother, I was afraid of my own child. If you've ever trusted someone with your whole heart and later questioned everything, I want you to stay with me until the end of this story. And before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Sometimes knowing we're not alone makes painful stories a little easier to carry. And if family stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep sharing them together. I didn't sleep that night. At 68 years old, I thought I understood the difference between fear and worry. Worry was when your daughter drove home during a snowstorm. Fear was hearing her voice in a message never meant for you and realizing you no longer knew who she was. I sat at my kitchen table until nearly 3 in the morning with that voice message replaying over and over in my head. Outside, the Ohio rain tapped softly against the windows, and the old clock above the stove made the room feel even lonelier. We need to get mom to sign before she starts asking questions. I must have listened to those words 20 times. Every time I did, I kept hoping I'd misunderstood them. Maybe Vanessa was talking about paperwork for insurance. Maybe Derek's comment about the doctor appointment was innocent somehow. But deep down, a cold feeling had already settled into my chest. Because mothers know. We know when our children are lying long before they admit it. We know when something is wrong in their marriage, even when they smile through dinner. And we definitely know when love has been replaced by calculation. I looked around my kitchen trying to calm myself. The yellow curtains above the sink were faded now, but Frank had picked them out himself 20 years ago because he said they made the room feel sunny even in winter. My late husband had never cared much about decorating, so the few times he offered opinions, I listened. His coffee mug still sat in the cabinet beside mine. I still couldn't move it. Some people might think that's unhealthy after 6 years of widowhood, but grief doesn't operate on schedules, especially not when you spent 42 years loving someone. Frank and I bought this house when Vanessa was only 4 years old. Back then, it was a tiny 2-bedroom home with cracked porch steps and ugly brown wallpaper. We couldn't afford much, but Frank used to say, "It's ours, Shari. Nobody can take that away from us." Funny how life punishes confidence. Over the years, we painted every room ourselves. We planted the maple tree in the front yard when Vanessa started middle school. Frank built the backyard deck one summer while blasting old Motown songs loud enough for the neighbors to complain. Every inch of that house carried our fingerprints, and every inch of it suddenly felt threatened. I stood up from the kitchen table and walked slowly through the dark hallway toward the living room. The family photographs on the wall seemed to watch me as I passed. There was Vanessa at 8 years old, missing her 2 front teeth. Vanessa at 16, crying before prom because she hated her hair. Vanessa graduating college in her blue cap and gown, while Frank held her so tightly she laughed. Back then, she called me every single day. Every day. Sometimes just to ask how long chicken should stay in the oven. Sometimes because she had a rude customer at work. Sometimes because she missed me. When Frank died from heart failure, Vanessa practically moved into my house for 2 weeks. She slept beside me like she was afraid I'd disappear too. "I've got you, Mom," she whispered one night while I cried into my pillow. "You'll never be alone." That memory hurt worse now than the voice message itself, because somewhere along the way, I had lost my daughter without even noticing it happen. And if I was being honest with myself, I knew exactly when things started changing. Derek. The first time Vanessa brought him to dinner, I actually liked him. That's the part that embarrasses me most. He arrived carrying expensive wine and complimented my cooking before he'd even tasted it. He shook my hand with both of his and looked directly into my eyes when he spoke. Men my age used to say that was the sign of good character. "Mrs. Diaz," he'd said warmly, "Vanessa talks about you constantly. I feel like I already know you." At the time, it sounded sweet. Now I realize men like Derek study people before they manipulate them. He learned quickly that I valued family above everything else. He learned I hated conflict. He learned Vanessa would do almost anything to keep peace in her relationships. And slowly, quietly, he inserted himself between us. Not dramatically at first, just little things. Vanessa stopped answering my evening calls because Derek needed quiet after work. Holiday visits became shorter. Sunday lunches turned into rushed coffee meetings. Whenever I invited Vanessa somewhere, she suddenly had to check with Derek first. At first, I blamed marriage itself. Young couples need space. I told myself not to become one of those mothers who cling too tightly to their adult children. But then I noticed something else. Vanessa seemed nervous all the time. Not unhappy exactly, just tense, like someone holding their breath for too long. The last Thanksgiving before Frank died, Vanessa accidentally spilled gravy on the tablecloth. Derek laughed immediately. "You're always so clumsy," he said. His tone sounded playful enough that nobody else reacted. But I noticed Vanessa's face. She froze for half a second before forcing herself to smile. That moment stayed with me. Then there were the financial comments. Derek talked about money constantly: investments, properties, equity, interest rates. He once asked me very casually how much homes in my neighborhood were selling for these days. Another time he asked whether I'd updated my will after Frank passed. At the time, I answered without suspicion, because why would I suspect my own son-in-law? Now those conversations replayed in my mind like warning signs I had ignored. I walked back into the kitchen and stared at my phone again. Vanessa hadn't called since the message. Maybe she hadn't realized she sent it to me. Or maybe she had. The thought made my stomach twist. Around 4 in the morning, I finally poured myself tea I was too anxious to drink. My hands still trembled slightly. That's when I remembered something that made my blood run cold. 2 weeks earlier, Vanessa had insisted on scheduling a doctor appointment for me. Just a routine memory screening, she'd said casually. "You know, because you mentioned forgetting your grocery list." I had laughed at the time. Every woman my age forgets grocery lists. But now Derek's words echoed in my ears again. After the doctor appointment, she'll be easier to control. Control? Not help. Not protect. Control. I slowly sat back down at the kitchen table as dawn began creeping through the windows. For the first time in my life, I locked my front door, not because I was afraid of strangers, but because I was beginning to fear my own family. The next morning, I told myself I was overreacting. That's what mothers do when reality becomes too painful. We soften sharp truths until they fit inside our hearts without cutting too deeply. By 9 o'clock, sunlight filled my kitchen, making everything look normal again. The roses outside swayed gently in the breeze. My neighbor's dog barked at squirrels like it did every morning. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower hummed. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. I almost convinced myself the voice message was some terrible misunderstanding. Almost. But then I pressed play again. We need to get Mom to sign before she starts asking questions. I closed my eyes tightly. Vanessa sounded nervous in the recording. Derek sounded calm. That difference mattered to me. People reveal themselves during moments of pressure. Vanessa whispered like someone afraid of consequences. Derek spoke like a man already certain of victory. I replayed the message again, holding the phone closer to my ear this time. At first, all I heard was muffled movement after Derek's comment about the doctor appointment. I nearly stopped listening when suddenly another sentence slipped through beneath the static. "If she signs the refinance papers, we can finally breathe." My entire body went cold. Refinance papers. I stared at the kitchen wall as if the words themselves had physically appeared there. My house. They were talking about my house. I'd never refinanced anything in my life. Frank and I had spent 27 years paying off our mortgage the old-fashioned way. We skipped vacations, we drove old cars, we repaired things instead of replacing them. When we finally made the last payment, Frank opened a cheap bottle of champagne and danced with me barefoot in this very kitchen. No bank owns us anymore, he'd said proudly. And now my daughter and her husband were discussing refinance papers behind my back. I felt nauseated. My hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped the phone into my tea. That's when my cell phone rang. Vanessa. For one terrible second, I considered not answering. But mothers spend decades training themselves to pick up the phone whenever their children call, no matter how hurt they feel. "Hi, sweetheart," I said carefully. Her voice sounded overly cheerful. "Morning." "Mom, did I wake you?" "No. You sound tired." I glanced toward the untouched coffee beside me. "Didn't sleep well." "Oh, no." She paused briefly. Maybe that's why the memory appointment is a good idea. There it was again. That appointment. I gripped the edge of the counter. "Vanessa," I asked slowly, "why exactly did you schedule that doctor visit?" Another pause. "Too long." "Well, you know, just routine stuff. Derek thought it might help ease your mind." Derek thought? Not Vanessa thought. Not the doctor recommended, Derek thought. I suddenly noticed something else too. My daughter no longer sounded like herself around me. Every sentence felt rehearsed, like she was reading from invisible cue cards. "You know how forgetful you've been lately," she added quickly. "Forgetful?" I frowned. "Yes, I occasionally misplaced my glasses or forgot where I parked at the grocery store. I was 68, not 98. But hearing my own daughter casually build a narrative around my memory made something inside me tighten. "I'm fine, Vanessa." "Of course you are," she said too fast. "Nobody's saying otherwise. Except somebody clearly was." I almost confronted her right then. The words rose all the way to my throat. I heard the message. "What are you trying to make me sign? Why is Derek talking about controlling me?" But fear stopped me. Because once certain questions are asked, relationships can never return to what they were before. Instead, I forced myself to sound calm. "What time is the appointment again Thursday at 11? Derek will drive us. Us, not you." Another tiny detail that suddenly felt important. "I can drive myself," I said. "No, Mom." Her tone sharpened slightly before softening again. "I mean, you shouldn't have to worry about parking downtown." Downtown? My real doctor's office was only 15 minutes away in the suburbs. Something was wrong. After we hung up, I immediately searched my kitchen drawer for the appointment card Vanessa had given me last week. My pulse quickened as I read the address. I didn't recognize the clinic name. That alone unsettled me. I walked into the living room and opened my laptop on the coffee table Frank bought from a flea market 20 years ago. The internet moves slower these days because I still refuse to upgrade anything unless it broke completely. The clinic website finally loaded. Cognitive Wellness Assessment Center. My stomach dropped. The homepage showed smiling elderly people holding hands with younger relatives beside phrases like helping families make difficult decisions, protecting loved ones through transitional care, evaluating independent living capability. Independent living capability. I suddenly felt like prey reading a hunter's brochure. There was a section explaining cognitive evaluations for aging adults, another about guardianship consultations. My chest tightened so sharply I had to sit back against the couch cushions. Guardianship. I knew enough about those cases from television to understand the danger. If someone convinced a court you were mentally incompetent, they could potentially control your finances, property, medical decisions your entire life. "No," I whispered aloud. Surely Vanessa wouldn't do that to me. But the voice message echoed again inside my head. Before she starts asking questions. Easier to control. I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to stop the panic rising inside me. Then another memory surfaced. 3 months earlier, Derek had offered to help organize my financial paperwork after I mentioned struggling with online banking passwords. At the time, I'd laughed and told him I preferred paper statements anyway. He'd seemed strangely disappointed. Another time, he asked whether I kept copies of my deed and insurance forms in the house. Back then, I thought he was being helpful. Now, every interaction felt contaminated. I stood abruptly and walked toward the hallway closet where Frank and I kept important documents in a locked metal box. My fingers trembled while unlocking it. Inside were our tax returns, insurance records, wills, and the house deed. I checked everything twice. Nothing appeared missing, but that didn't comfort me nearly as much as I wanted it to, because trust had already been broken, and once trust breaks, even ordinary silence starts sounding dangerous. That afternoon, Vanessa sent me a smiling selfie from her office with a text underneath. "Love you, Mom." I stared at it for a long time. Her makeup looked perfect. Her dark hair was neatly pinned back. To anyone else, she looked like a successful, happy woman living a normal life. But I noticed the shadows beneath her eyes. I noticed the forced smile. And for the first time, I wondered whether my daughter was hiding fear instead of guilt. The thought confused me even more. Was she helping Derek willingly, or was she trapped beside him? Somehow, I didn't know which answer scared me more. Around sunset, I walked outside to water my roses again. Frank used to say roses survive because they grow thorns before blooming. At the time, I thought that sounded cynical. Now I wondered if he'd simply lived long enough to understand people better than I did. As I reached for the hose, I suddenly realized something chilling. The woman who sent me birthday cards every year with handwritten notes about how much she loved me. The little girl who once cried when I left her at kindergarten might be helping her husband take everything Frank and I spent a lifetime building, and I still couldn't bring myself to hate her for it. Thursday arrived faster than I wanted. I barely slept the night before the appointment. Every creak in the house sounded louder than usual, and every shadow seemed to carry some terrible warning I couldn't fully understand yet. By 10 in the morning, I was standing in front of my bedroom mirror, trying to decide whether I looked old. That probably sounds foolish. But once someone plants the idea that your age makes you weak, you start examining yourself differently. I stared at the silver strands in my curls, the lines around my mouth, the slight softness beneath my chin. Did I really seem confused lately? Had I repeated stories, forgotten things I hated that they had already managed to make me question my own mind? The doorbell rang exactly at 10:15. Derek. Of course he was early. When I opened the front door, he stood there smiling warmly with a cardboard tray holding 2 coffees. "Morning, Sherry," he said smoothly. "Thought you might want something before the appointment." His voice sounded so normal. That was the terrifying part. The same man who had talked about controlling me sounded perfectly pleasant standing on my porch like a loving son-in-law. Vanessa stood beside him, wearing a beige sweater and nervous eyes. She hugged me quickly. "You look nice, Mom. You both came together?" I asked. "Derek drove?" She answered immediately. Derek handed me a coffee. "Ready?" "No." But I smiled politely anyway, because I still hadn't decided how much they knew I suspected. As we walked toward Derek's SUV, I noticed Vanessa glancing at him before answering even simple questions. Tiny looks, quick checks, like she was measuring his mood every few seconds. I had seen that behavior before, not in my daughter, in abused women at the elementary school where I used to teach. Mothers who apologized constantly, women who became smaller around their husbands. The realization made my chest ache. The drive downtown felt suffocating. Derek controlled every conversation while soft jazz played quietly through the speakers. He talked about traffic, property taxes, a new condo development somebody was building near the river. Meanwhile, Vanessa barely spoke at all. At one point, I asked casually, "How's work going, sweetheart?" Before Vanessa could answer, Derek jumped in. "She's exhausted. They're overworking her again." Vanessa looked out the window. That small moment bothered me more than I could explain. He answered for her automatically, like he'd been doing it for years. 20 minutes later, we pulled into a medical building I'd never seen before. The sign outside read Midwest Cognitive and Transitional Wellness Center. My stomach tightened immediately. The building itself looked expensive but cold. Gray walls, dark glass windows, no flowers outside, no warmth. Inside the waiting room smelled faintly like lemon disinfectant and burnt coffee. Several elderly people sat quietly beside younger relatives who filled out paperwork for them. One old man kept asking where his wife was. Nobody answered him. Fear crept slowly up my spine. Derek approached the reception desk confidently, like he'd been there before. "We're here for Shari Diaz," he said. The receptionist smiled professionally. "Of course. We already have the intake forms." "Already have." I looked toward Vanessa sharply. She wouldn't meet my eyes. The receptionist handed Derek a clipboard instead of me. Not me. Derek. That single detail made alarm bells ring inside my head. I stepped forward calmly. "I can hold my own paperwork." The receptionist looked startled before giving me an awkward smile. "Oh, of course." Derek laughed softly beside me. "She's very independent," he said. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl, like independence was a problem he intended to solve. I sat down with the clipboard and began reading carefully. Very carefully. Most of the forms looked routine at first. Medical history, emergency contacts, insurance information. Then I reached another page. Family concerns regarding cognitive decline. My pulse jumped. Under listed concerns, several boxes were already checked. Memory lapses, difficulty managing finances, confusion during conversations, possible vulnerability to poor decision making. I stared at the paper in disbelief. Someone had filled this out before I arrived. Someone had described me as mentally declining. My hands went ice cold. Slowly, I lifted my eyes toward Vanessa. The color drained from her face the moment she realized what I was reading. "Mom, you filled this out," I whispered. "No, sweetheart," Derek interrupted smoothly. "We just answered a few preliminary questions they asked online. Standard procedure. Standard procedure." I looked back at the form. One section included examples, forgots appointments, repeats stories, shows signs of paranoia. Paranoia. My heart pounded painfully. They were building a case, a careful, quiet case. I suddenly remembered every moment over the past year when Derek casually mentioned my age around friends. Shari gets confused with technology. Shari forgets passwords all the time. Shari probably shouldn't be driving at night. At the time, they sounded harmless. Now they felt strategic, like tiny bricks building a wall around my credibility. "I'm not signing this," I said firmly. Derek crouched beside my chair, immediately lowering his voice, as though speaking to a frightened child. "Nobody's attacking you, Shari." That tone. Calm, patient, controlled. It made me furious. I said, "I'm not signing it." Several people in the waiting room glanced toward us. Vanessa finally spoke. "Mom, please don't make this difficult." The sentence hit me harder than I expected. Not because of the words, because of how tired she sounded, like she'd repeated those same words many times before in private arguments with Derek. I looked at my daughter carefully. Her mascara couldn't completely hide the dark circles beneath her eyes. Her wedding ring hung slightly loose on her finger, like she'd lost weight recently. And suddenly, I noticed something else. Fear. Real fear. Not of me. Of him. A nurse appeared beside us before I could think further. "Mrs. Diaz. The doctor is ready for you." Derek stood immediately. "Great." The nurse smiled politely. "Actually, we usually begin with the patient alone." For the first time all morning, Derek looked irritated. Only for a second. But I saw it, and Vanessa saw it too. Interesting. Inside the evaluation room, the doctor greeted me professionally enough. He asked basic questions at first. Today's date, the current president, simple memory exercises. I answered everything correctly. But what unsettled me wasn't the doctor. It was the way Derek behaved whenever he entered the room later. He interrupted constantly. "Shari gets mixed up sometimes. She forgot her bank password twice. She nearly left the stove on." None of those stories were even fully true. And every time I answered confidently, Derek smiled in this strange, disappointed way, as though my competence inconvenienced him. At one point, the doctor asked whether I managed my own finances. Before I could respond, Derek answered, "She tries to." Something inside me snapped. "I manage my own finances perfectly fine," I said sharply. The room went silent. Derek chuckled softly. "Nobody's criticizing you." But they were. That's exactly what they were doing. And for the first time since hearing the voice message, fear began slowly transforming into anger. Cold anger. Because I finally understood something important. This wasn't concern. This wasn't love. This was preparation. And whatever Derek planned to do next. He had already started laying the groundwork long before I ever heard that message. I didn't speak during the drive home from the clinic. Neither did Vanessa. Only Derek seemed comfortable humming softly along with the radio, like we had just finished some harmless family errand, instead of an evaluation that made me feel like my entire life was being quietly stripped away. The silence inside the SUV felt heavy enough to choke on. At one red light, I glanced toward Vanessa. She kept staring down at her hands twisted tightly in her lap. Not once did she look peaceful. That mattered to me more than anything. Because guilt and fear can sometimes look alike, but a mother eventually learns the difference. When Derek pulled into my driveway, he turned toward me with that same polished smile. "See, that wasn't so bad." I forced myself to smile back. "No," I said softly, "not bad at all." But inside, something fundamental had changed. For days, I had been confused. Now, I was alert. The moment I stepped into my house, I realized I could no longer afford denial. Frank used to say instincts were gifts, people ignored until it was too late. Mine were screaming now. I waited until Derek's SUV disappeared down the street before locking the front door and pulling every curtain shut. Then I made one phone call. "Gloria." I asked the moment she answered. "I need help." There was a pause. Not because Gloria Bennett didn't recognize my voice, but because she immediately recognized the fear inside it. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. Gloria had been my best friend for nearly 30 years. We met volunteering at a school fundraiser when our daughters were teenagers. She was one of those women who walked into rooms like she already knew every secret hiding there. Sharp eyes, sharp tongue, sharp instincts. After retiring from decades as a legal assistant, Gloria spent most of her time gardening, gossiping, and terrifying dishonest people without even trying. By the time she arrived, I had the kettle boiling and every document from the clinic spread across my dining room table. Gloria took one look at my face and said, "Tell me everything." So I did. The voice message, the refinance papers, the clinic, the forms describing me as cognitively declining, the way Derek kept answering questions for me. Gloria listened without interrupting, though her expression darkened more with every minute. When I finished, she slowly removed her glasses. "Oh, Shari." That frightened me more than panic would have, because calm people only become that quiet when situations are serious. She picked up the evaluation forms and began reading carefully. Then she muttered something under her breath. "What?" Gloria tapped one section with her finger. "These intake notes." I leaned closer. "Family reports increasing confusion over financial management." My stomach tightened. "I never said that." "I know you didn't." Gloria looked up at me directly. "But somebody did." The room suddenly felt colder. Gloria continued flipping through the paperwork with the focus of someone assembling a puzzle. Then she stopped abruptly. "There." What she pointed toward a line near the bottom of the page. Recommended follow-up consultation regarding long-term decision support and financial oversight options. Financial oversight. I sat down heavily in the chair across from her. They're building towards something, aren't they? Gloria didn't answer immediately. That silence was answer enough. Finally, she sighed. "I've seen situations like this before, Shari. Usually after someone develops dementia or severe illness. Family members start seeking legal authority over finances. But I'm not sick. I know that. And I'm not confused. I know that too. Her voice softened. But if someone wants to create that impression slowly enough, they can make ordinary aging sound dangerous. I felt physically ill. Gloria reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Listen carefully to me. Do not sign anything. Nothing. No matter how emotional Vanessa gets or how charming Derek becomes. I nodded. Then another terrifying thought struck me. What if they've already started something legally? Gloria's eyes narrowed. Have you noticed unusual mail? I frowned. Like what loan offers? Equity notices? Financial paperwork you didn't request? I thought for a second before standing abruptly. There's been junk mail. A lot lately. Show me. We spent the next hour going through every stack of unopened mail in my kitchen drawer. At first, most of it looked harmless. Credit card offers, insurance advertisements, home improvement flyers. Then Gloria found an envelope that immediately changed the air in the room. It carried the logo of a mortgage lending company. Inside was a letter referencing a recent inquiry regarding refinancing eligibility. My hands started trembling again. I never contacted them. I know, Gloria said quietly. She kept reading. The letter included estimated borrowing amounts based on my property value. My property value. Another envelope referenced home equity lending opportunities following your recent information request. Recent information request. I sank slowly into my chair. Oh my God. Gloria's face hardened. Somebody has been exploring financial options using your address. Can they do that legally? They can inquire about public information. But combined with everything else, she shook her head grimly. This is beginning to smell very ugly. I suddenly remembered another detail. Derek asked me for a copy of my homeowner's insurance last winter. Gloria looked up sharply. Why he claimed he wanted to compare rates for us. And did you give it to him? I closed my eyes. Yes. The disappointment I felt in myself almost hurt worse than the betrayal itself. Widowhood changes people in ways nobody talks about openly. After Frank died, I became softer around family because loneliness makes trust feel safer than suspicion. I wanted to believe good intentions still existed. Maybe Derek recognized that before I did. Gloria stood and walked toward the kitchen window, thinking silently. Finally, she turned back toward me. Shari, I need you to answer honestly. How much access does Vanessa have to your personal information? Some. She helped me online after Frank died. Passwords. A few. Bank information. I hesitated. Too long? Gloria cursed quietly. Shame washed through me. It was easier, I whispered defensively. After Frank passed, I was overwhelmed. Vanessa offered to organize things. And Derek? I don't know how much she shared with him. But even as I said it, I already suspected the answer. Too much. Gloria returned to the table and lowered her voice carefully. I'm not saying they've committed fraud yet, but you need to start protecting yourself immediately. Protecting yourself. I never imagined hearing those words regarding my own daughter. Gloria helped me make a list. Change passwords, contact the bank, freeze unnecessary account access, secure legal documents, monitor property records. Every task made the situation feel more real, more dangerous. Around 6 that evening, my phone buzzed again. Vanessa. I stared at the screen while my heart pounded. Gloria nodded toward the phone. Answer it. I picked up carefully. Hello? Mom, Vanessa sounded exhausted. How are you feeling after today? I looked at Gloria before answering. I'm fine. A pause. Then Vanessa spoke more quietly. Derek thinks the doctor may want additional testing later? Derek thinks? Again? Always Derek. I suddenly noticed something else too. Vanessa never once asked how I felt emotionally after being evaluated like a child. Not once. Only whether I'd cooperate further. The realization cut deeply. I'm tired, sweetheart, I said. Okay. Another silence. We love you, Mom. We, not I. I swallowed hard. Good night, Vanessa. After the call ended, Gloria looked at me with painful sympathy. What? She sounds scared. I nodded slowly. Yes. But as darkness settled outside my windows, another realization settled inside me too. Fear didn't excuse betrayal. And whether Vanessa was trapped or not, someone was trying to turn my own home into their escape plan. The following Tuesday, Vanessa showed up at my house unannounced. I was in the backyard trimming dead roses when I heard her call my name from the porch. Mom, the sound of her voice still pulled at my heart automatically. That's the terrible thing about motherhood. Love doesn't disappear just because trust does. I turned slowly. Vanessa stood near the screen door, clutching her purse tightly against her chest. Even from a distance, I could tell she looked exhausted. Her skin had lost its healthy glow, and there were shadows beneath her eyes no makeup could fully hide. For one painful second, all I saw was my little girl again, the child who used to run into my arms after nightmares. Then I remembered the forms, the checked boxes, possible cognitive decline. I set down the gardening shears carefully. What are you doing here? Her expression flickered slightly at my tone. I wanted to see you. Alone, I noticed immediately. No Derek. That mattered. Vanessa walked slowly down the patio steps toward me. The autumn wind lifted strands of her dark hair across her face. You haven't answered my text much, she said quietly. I've been thinking. She swallowed hard. About the appointment. About whether my own daughter was helping someone destroy my life. But I didn't say that. Instead, I nodded once. Vanessa wrapped her arms around herself tightly. Mom, I know this probably feels uncomfortable, but Derek and I are only trying to help you. There it was again. Help. People always use gentle words before they take away your choices. I don't need cognitive evaluations, I replied evenly. Her eyes darted away from mine for half a second. That's not what the doctor said. Anger rose instantly in my chest. The doctor said I answered everything correctly. Well, yes, but he also mentioned follow-up monitoring. Monitoring. I almost laughed at how clinical and cold that sounded. This was exactly how independence disappeared from elderly people. Not dramatically, not overnight, one concerned conversation at a time until suddenly everyone else controlled the narrative. I crossed my arms. Did Derek tell you to come here? No. Too fast. A lie. Vanessa sat carefully on the patio chair Frank built years ago. I remained standing. She looked smaller somehow, sitting there alone without Derek beside her. Less polished, more fragile. I know you're upset, she whispered. But things have been hard lately. That sentence caught my attention immediately. Hard. Not busy, not stressful. Hard. What things, I asked softly. Vanessa opened her mouth, then stopped. Fear flashed across her face so quickly I almost missed it. Finally, she forced a weak smile. Just life. No, there was more. I sat down across from her slowly. When did you become afraid of your husband? The question hit her like a slap. Vanessa froze completely. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she looked toward the house nervously, almost instinctively, even though Derek wasn't there. I'm not afraid of Derek. Another lie. This one hurt worse because I could hear the desperation inside it. I leaned forward slightly. Vanessa, I raised you. I know your faces. I know your silences. Something is wrong. Her eyes immediately filled with tears. For one brief moment, I thought she might finally tell me the truth. Instead, she whispered, You don't understand how bad things are right now. My pulse quickened. What things? Again, she hesitated. Then suddenly her phone buzzed. The change in her expression was immediate and terrifying. Her shoulders stiffened. Her breathing changed. She looked down at the screen, and all the emotion vanished from her face like a curtain dropping. Derek, she said quietly. Of course. She answered immediately. Hi. Her voice sounded completely different now. Careful. Controlled. I watched every second of the conversation while pretending to focus on my roses. Yes, I'm still here. Pause. No, she's fine. Another pause. I said she's fine. A longer silence followed. Vanessa's face tightened slightly. Then she glanced toward me. I'll ask. She lowered the phone slowly. Derek wants to know if you've thought more about meeting with the financial advisor. Financial advisor. The words landed heavily between us. I stared at my daughter in disbelief. Even now, even after everything. Vanessa wouldn't meet my eyes. He thinks refinancing could make things easier for everyone. Everyone. Meaning them. I stood up abruptly. This is about my house. Vanessa rose too quickly, panic flashing across her face. No, Mom. It's not like that. Then explain it. I can't. The honesty of that answer stunned me. Not won't. Can't. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. You think I'm a terrible daughter? She whispered. I looked at her for a long time before answering. I think you're trapped in something you're afraid to name. She covered her mouth instantly and started crying harder. That reaction told me everything. But before she could speak again, I heard a car door slam in the driveway. Both of us turned automatically. Derek. My stomach dropped. Vanessa wiped her tears so fast it frightened me. Within seconds, her entire posture changed again. Straighter, quieter, guarded, like someone preparing for impact. Derek walked into the backyard with perfect calm sunglasses resting on his head and a charming smile already prepared. There you two are. His eyes moved between our faces quickly, analyzing the situation in an instant. Everything okay? Vanessa nodded too quickly. Fine. Derek looked at me warmly. I hope Vanessa didn't overwhelm you with medical talk again? He laughed lightly. She worries too much. The manipulation in that sentence was so smooth, it almost impressed me. He had instantly reframed the situation. Vanessa became emotional. He became reasonable. And I became the aging mother everybody needed to gently manage. I suddenly understood how dangerous men like Derek truly were. Not because they screamed, because they smiled while dismantling people. Derek sat beside Vanessa and casually placed his hand on her knee. Not lovingly, possessively. Actually, he said, I wanted to stop by because I found someone who could help explain the refinancing options clearly. No pressure, of course. My entire body stiffened. You already spoke to someone just gathering information. His tone remained pleasant. With rates changing, there may be smart ways to protect your future. Protect your future. There it was again. Every threat wrapped inside concern. I folded my arms tightly. My future was fine before everybody started discussing my mental decline behind my back. Silence. Vanessa looked horrified, but Derek barely reacted. That alone chilled me. A guilty person panics when exposed. A manipulator adapts. He leaned back slowly and sighed, like a patient teacher dealing with misunderstanding. Shari, nobody thinks you're incapable. Really, because the clinic paperwork suggested otherwise. For the first time, something cold flickered behind his eyes. Gone almost instantly. But I saw it, and I think he realized I saw it too. Those were standard intake questions, he replied smoothly. No, those were accusations. Vanessa whispered softly. Mom, I turned toward her. Did you tell them I couldn't manage my finances? Her face crumpled immediately. That answer was enough. Pain exploded through my chest so sharply I almost couldn't breathe. Because even if Derek manipulated her, she still participated. Derek stood calmly. This conversation is getting emotional. Maybe we should continue later. Of course he wanted control back. I suddenly understood something important. Derek didn't fear anger. He feared private conversations between me and Vanessa. That meant Vanessa knew more than she was saying, and maybe some part of her still wanted someone to save her. As Derek guided her toward the driveway, Vanessa glanced back at me once. Only once. But in that single look, I saw guilt, fear, and something else that terrified me most of all, a silent plea for help. For the next 3 days, Vanessa disappeared. No calls, no texts, nothing. And somehow that silence frightened me more than the arguments had. People who are merely angry still reach out eventually. People who are afraid become quiet. By Friday afternoon, I found myself standing in the cereal aisle at the grocery store, staring blankly at boxes I had no intention of buying. My thoughts kept circling the same terrible questions. How long had this been happening? How much had Vanessa hidden from me? And the worst question of all, how much damage had already been done? I barely noticed someone calling my name until a shopping cart bumped lightly against mine. Shari Diaz. I looked up. Marilyn Cooper from church stood there holding frozen vegetables and wearing the startled expression people get when they unexpectedly encounter someone they've heard gossip about. I forced a smile. "Hi, Marilyn." She hesitated awkwardly. Then she lowered her voice. "I heard Vanessa and Derek have been going through some financial stress." My stomach tightened immediately. "What do you mean?" Marilyn looked uncomfortable now, clearly realizing she'd said too much already. "Oh, maybe I shouldn't." "No," I said calmly. "Please." She sighed. "Well, my nephew works downtown in commercial real estate. He mentioned Derek's name came up connected to some failed investment deal." My pulse began hammering. "What kind of deal?" "I don't know all the details. Something about condo developments and unpaid contractors." She shifted nervously. "I'm sure rumors exaggerate things, but I already knew they probably didn't." I thanked her and somehow finished shopping without remembering half of it afterward. The moment I got home, I called Gloria. "Come over," I said. "I think we're missing part of this story." 30 minutes later, Gloria sat at my kitchen table with her laptop open and reading glasses low on her nose. "Spell Derek's business name again." "Morales Urban Holdings," Gloria typed quickly. At first, nothing alarming appeared. A polished website, professional photos, luxury property slogans. But Gloria kept digging, and eventually the cracks began showing. Expired business licenses, tax liens, civil court filings. One article from a local business journal mentioned stalled construction projects connected to Derek's company. Then Gloria found something worse. "Oh, Shari." "What?" She slowly turned the laptop toward me. "A public legal filing. One of Derek's investors was suing him. According to the complaint, large sums of money had vanished from a development account." I felt dizzy reading the numbers. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. "There's more," Gloria said quietly. She clicked another document. Creditors, late payments, default notices. The deeper we searched, the uglier everything became. Derek wasn't just struggling financially. He was drowning. And drowning people grab whatever floats nearby. Even family. Especially family. I sat back heavily in my chair. "My house." Gloria nodded grimly. "He needs money fast." I pressed trembling fingers against my temple. Suddenly, every conversation over the past year made horrible sense. The sudden interest in property values, the refinance discussions, the memory evaluations. It wasn't random. It was strategy. Gloria continued reading silently for several minutes before speaking again. "Shari, I think you need to prepare yourself for something painful." I looked up slowly. "I think Vanessa may have already given him access to financial information about you." The words landed like stones in my chest. Part of me already knew, but hearing them aloud still hurt. She wouldn't steal from me. Gloria's expression softened immediately. "I'm not saying she planned to, but desperate people convince themselves they're only borrowing. They tell themselves they'll fix everything later." Borrowing. That word twisted inside me. I thought about Vanessa as a little girl taking dollar bills from Frank's dresser when she wanted ice cream from the neighborhood truck. She always confessed afterward because guilt ate her alive. She used to cry if she accidentally hurt somebody, I whispered. Gloria reached across the table gently. "She still might?" I wanted to believe that. God, I wanted to believe that. But love becomes complicated once betrayal enters the room. That evening, I made coffee and sat alone on my back porch, watching the sunset stain the sky orange and purple. Frank used to sit beside me every Friday after work, with his old radio playing quietly while neighborhood kids rode bikes down the sidewalk. I missed him so badly then, not just because I loved him, because Frank always knew exactly what people were. I was the forgiving one in our marriage. Frank was the cautious one. Not everybody deserves unlimited chances, Sherry, he used to tell me. I never fully understood that until now. Around 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed. Vanessa. My heart jumped instantly. I answered on the second ring. Hello, silence. Then soft breathing. Vanessa. Her voice finally came through, barely above a whisper. Is Derek there? The question startled me. No. Another silence followed. Then suddenly she began crying. Not polite crying, not controlled crying, the kind that sounds like a person finally collapsing under weight they've carried too long. Mom, she whispered brokenly, I'm sorry. Every protective instinct inside me rose immediately, despite everything. What happened? He's so angry all the time now. Fear crawled slowly up my spine. Did he hurt you? No, she answered quickly. Too quickly. I closed my eyes. Vanessa, I shouldn't have called, she whispered suddenly. Panic entered her voice. Forget this conversation. Wait. But I heard another sound in the background, a door slamming. Vanessa gasped softly, then Derek's voice echoed faintly somewhere behind her. Who are you talking to? The terror in my daughter's breathing made my blood run cold. Nobody, she answered immediately. Nobody. Not Mom. Not Sherry. Nobody. The line suddenly disconnected. I sat frozen on the porch, staring at my phone. Then it buzzed again instantly. A text from Vanessa. Sorry. Pocket dial. Everything's fine. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Pocket dial. Just like the first accidental voice message. Except now I didn't believe in accidents anymore. I called Gloria immediately after. By the time she arrived, I was pacing my kitchen. She's scared, I told her. I know. I think he listens to her calls. Gloria nodded slowly. Probably. I stopped pacing. What if she's in real danger? Gloria studied me carefully. Sherry, you need to remember something important. What you can love Vanessa without letting her destroy you. Tears burned suddenly behind my eyes. That's my daughter. I know. She sounds trapped. She may be. Gloria's voice remained gentle but firm. But trapped people can still make dangerous choices. I sank into the kitchen chair, emotionally exhausted, because that was the part nobody talks about openly. Victims sometimes become participants. Fear can turn good people into accomplices. And mothers will destroy themselves trying to save children who are old enough to save themselves. Around midnight, after Gloria left, I walked quietly through my dark house, checking every lock again. Not because I thought Derek would break in, because I no longer knew how far desperation might push him. As I passed the hallway photographs, I stopped in front of Vanessa's college graduation picture. Frank stood beside her, grinning proudly, with his arm around her shoulders. I touched the frame gently. You promised me she'd be okay? I whispered to him. But the house stayed silent, and deep down, for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized I might eventually have to choose between protecting my daughter or protecting myself. 3 days later, Derek showed up at my house carrying cinnamon rolls. If someone had told me a month earlier that homemade pastries could feel threatening, I would have laughed. But manipulation rarely arrives looking dangerous. Sometimes it smells like sugar and warm bread. I opened the front door cautiously. Derek stood there smiling in dark jeans and a navy sweater, holding a white bakery box like some friendly neighbor dropping by before church. Morning, Sherry. I didn't invite him inside immediately. That seemed to surprise him. I was in the area, he continued, smoothly lifting the box slightly. Thought I'd bring breakfast. You were never in the area before you needed my house, I thought. Aloud, I simply said, Vanessa, with you, no. He smiled again, though I noticed tension around his eyes now. She's working. Something about that answer felt rehearsed. After several awkward seconds, I stepped aside and let him enter. Refusing would only alert him that I was no longer playing the role he expected. Derek walked into my kitchen comfortably, like a man already imagining ownership. That realization made my skin crawl. He placed the pastries on the counter while I made coffee, mostly to keep my hands busy. For a few minutes, he chatted casually about traffic and weather, as if nothing unusual existed between us. Then eventually the mask slipped. "I've been worried about Vanessa," he said quietly. I glanced at him over the coffee cups. "She's under a lot of pressure." Pressure. Interesting choice of word. "She looked upset last week," I replied carefully. Derek sighed heavily and leaned against the counter. "You know how emotional she gets." The dismissal in that sentence irritated me instantly. Vanessa wasn't emotional. She was frightened. But Derek wanted every reaction framed as instability. That pattern suddenly became impossible to ignore. I handed him coffee. "What exactly is going on financially?" For the first time since arriving, genuine tension crossed his face. Very brief, very controlled. But there. He forced a tired smile. "Business has been rough lately. Economy stuff." I said nothing. Silence is powerful when dishonest people expect reassurance. Eventually, Derek continued talking simply to fill the space. "Some investments didn't turn out the way we hoped." Investments? Such a clean word for destruction. "How bad is it?" I asked quietly. He stared into his coffee for a moment before answering. "Bad enough that Vanessa's scared all the time." There it was again. Not "we're scared." Vanessa's scared. Even now, he positioned himself outside the damage emotionally, like a narrator instead of a participant. I sat down slowly across from him. "And that's why you need my house." The room went still. Derek looked up immediately. To his credit, he recovered fast. "No, no, Shari. That's not fair." "Then explain the refinance papers." He rubbed his jaw slowly, buying time. It was only an idea. For whose benefit? His eyes hardened slightly. For everybody's. Another lie wrapped in community language. I stared directly at him. "You had me evaluated." That was Vanessa's idea. The speed of that answer shocked me. He threw her under the bus without hesitation. And suddenly, I understood something ugly. Derek protected himself first. Always. Even from his own wife. She told me she was worried. He continued carefully. I only supported her. I almost admired the skill of it. Every manipulation repositioned him as the calm helper standing beside unstable women. Poor worried Vanessa. Poor aging Shari. Reliable Derek managing everything. But I was beginning to see the machinery underneath the performance now. "You filled out those forms," I said. His expression remained neutral. "The clinic asked family members questions. You described me as cognitively declining." We answered honestly. Honestly. Anger flashed through me so sharply I nearly stood up. "I pay my own bills. I maintain this house. I drive myself everywhere." "Of course." Derek's voice stayed maddeningly calm. "Nobody said you're incapable." Again with that word. Incapable. Not once before this nightmare had anyone ever described me using language associated with helplessness. Now it appeared constantly, like they were trying to train me into accepting it. Derek leaned forward slightly. "Shari, you have to understand the position Vanessa and I are in." There it was. Finally. The truth beginning to emerge. I folded my hands tightly together beneath the table. "What position is that?" For the first time, genuine exhaustion appeared on his face. We could lose everything. Silence settled heavily between us. And suddenly, I realized something important. Derek wasn't visiting to charm me today. He was desperate. Desperate people eventually stop performing perfectly. "How much debt?" I asked quietly. He looked away. "That's complicated." "No. Numbers are usually very simple." His jaw tightened. "More than we can handle right now." My stomach sank. I thought about Vanessa crying on the phone, about Marilyn's comments at the grocery store, about lawsuits and missing investment money. How much, I repeated. Derek finally answered without looking at me. Several 100,000. The room tilted slightly. Hundreds of thousands. I felt physically cold. How is that even possible? He laughed bitterly under his breath. Bad partnerships, construction delays, investors panicked. And now you want to borrow against my home. It wouldn't hurt you. The certainty in his voice terrified me, as if he had already convinced himself exploiting me was reasonable. We'd make the payments, he continued quickly. It would only stabilize things temporarily. Temporarily. Another dangerous word. I stared at him carefully. And if you failed, his silence answered everything. A horrible realization spread slowly through my chest. They weren't trying to improve my future. They were trying to survive theirs, at my expense. Derek suddenly softened his tone again. Vanessa didn't want you stressed. That sentence broke something inside me, because despite everything, part of me still wanted desperately to believe my daughter had fought against this. She participated anyway, I whispered. Derek's expression changed subtly then. Not guilt. Calculation. She loves you. Love doesn't look like secret evaluations and refinance papers. He sighed heavily and stood up, pacing once across the kitchen. You grew up differently, Shari. People our age are drowning financially right now. Vanessa's terrified. We'll lose the condo. The condo? Not homelessness, not survival. The condo. Interesting. I remembered suddenly how proud Derek had been of their expensive lifestyle. Luxury vacations, designer furniture, high-end restaurants constantly posted online, a lifestyle built partly on debt and illusion. And now my home had become their emergency exit. Derek stopped pacing and looked directly at me. I know you think I'm the villain here. Because you are, I thought. But aloud, I remained quiet. His voice lowered carefully. I'm trying to protect my wife. That might have almost sounded noble if I hadn't seen Vanessa flinch every time his name appeared on her phone. Before I could respond, Derek's cell phone buzzed. He checked it quickly, and for the first time since arriving, he looked rattled. What I asked immediately? Nothing. But his hands tightened around the phone. Then another message arrived, and another. His face visibly paled. Fear. Real fear. Interesting. Is it about the lawsuits? I asked softly. His eyes snapped toward me. For one brief moment, all the charm disappeared completely. What remained underneath was cold, angry desperation. Then just as quickly, the mask returned. I should go, he said. He grabbed his coat too fast, nearly knocking over his coffee. At the front door, he turned back toward me with forced calm. Vanessa loves you, Shari. Don't punish her for my mistakes. The statement sounded almost sincere. Almost. But something about it unsettled me deeply. Because manipulative people often confess partially when they sense control slipping away. Not from remorse, from strategy. After he left, I stood alone in my silent kitchen, staring at the untouched cinnamon rolls. Then I opened the trash can and threw every single one away. 2 nights after Derek's visit, I woke up at 2:13 in the morning to my phone vibrating across the nightstand. At my age, late-night phone calls usually mean hospitals or death. My heart was already racing before I even looked at the screen. Vanessa. I answered immediately. Vanessa. No response. Only muffled sounds. For a second, I thought the call had failed. Then I realized I wasn't hearing silence. I was hearing movement, breathing, and voices. My entire body went still. Another accidental call. Or maybe not accidental at all. I sat upright in bed without making a sound. Then Derek's voice came through clearly enough to freeze the blood in my veins. Crying isn't going to fix this. Vanessa sounded panicked. Please lower your voice. I'm tired of your guilt trips, Vanessa. I never wanted it to go this far. My chest tightened painfully. Neither of them knew I could hear them. I held the phone so tightly, my fingers started aching. Then Derek spoke again. Your mother signs the papers, or we lose everything. Papers. There it was again. Vanessa started crying harder. You promised me we were only borrowing temporarily, because that was before investors started threatening lawsuits. Lawsuits. The word echoed through my dark bedroom. I pressed my free hand against my mouth. Everything Gloria uncovered was true. Every terrible suspicion. I can't do this anymore, Vanessa whispered brokenly. Yes, you can. No. Yes. Derek's voice sharpened dangerously. Unless you'd rather explain homelessness to your daughter someday. Daughter? I frowned in confusion. Then I remembered. Vanessa had always wanted children, but she never had any. The sadness in her voice suddenly made more sense. Maybe they had been trying. Maybe money destroyed that dream too. For one dangerous second, sympathy almost softened me again. Then Derek spoke. If your mother refuses to cooperate, we'll make this official. The air left my lungs. Vanessa gasped softly. Derek? She already looks unstable. My heart started pounding so violently I thought I might faint. Unstable. He was planning it, actually planning it. You saw the clinic report, he continued coldly. One more evaluation, and we can push for supervised financial oversight. I felt physically sick. Vanessa whispered something too quiet to hear. Then Derek answered with terrifying calm. She's old, Vanessa. Courts see this kind of thing every day. Old. Just old. As though age itself erased humanity. Tears filled my eyes instantly, not from weakness, but from rage so deep it hurt. I had spent 40 years teaching children to read. I buried my husband. I survived cancer at 52. I worked 2 jobs while Frank recovered after surgery decades ago. And now some man who married my daughter wanted the world to see me as a confused burden waiting to be managed. Vanessa's voice trembled badly. She's my mother. Then act like her daughter and help her. Help her. That word again. Always help. Manipulators rename cruelty until victims begin doubting reality itself. There was sudden movement on the line, like someone pacing. Then Derek's voice lowered into something colder than anger. If she doesn't sign willingly, we'll do this another way. I stopped breathing. What does that mean? Vanessa whispered. It means we document concerns. We talk to attorneys. We protect assets before she ruins herself. Ruins herself. The lies sounded so polished now, so practiced. How long had he been rehearsing this narrative? Then came the sentence that changed everything for me. I'm not going to drown because your mother refuses to help family. Not we. There it was. The truth finally stripped bare. This had never been about protecting Vanessa. It had never been about family. It was about Derek saving himself. Vanessa suddenly began sobbing openly. I hate what we're becoming. For a moment, silence filled the line, and when Derek spoke again, his voice sounded quieter, almost exhausted. You think I wanted this? He muttered. Do you think I enjoy begging? You stopped begging months ago. The sentence hit like lightning. Months ago, meaning the manipulation had already been happening long before I discovered the voice message. How much did you tell her? Derek demanded suddenly. Nothing. Don't lie to me. Fear flooded Vanessa's voice instantly. I swear. Another silence. Heavy. Dangerous. Then Derek spoke in a terrifyingly calm tone. You cannot lose control now, Vanessa. Do you understand me? Lose control. Not solve problems. Not protect marriage. Control. The word kept returning because control was the real obsession underneath everything else. I suddenly realized my hands were shaking uncontrollably. Not just from fear, from heartbreak. Because despite everything, I could hear the misery in my daughter's voice. She sounded trapped between terror and guilt, with nowhere safe left to stand. Then I heard something else, a soft thud, like someone sitting down heavily, and Vanessa whispered words that nearly broke me. She trusted me. Tears spilled down my face immediately. Derek answered after several seconds. She still can. If you stop panicking, that was when I understood the most horrifying thing of all. Derek truly believed he could still manipulate this situation successfully. Even now. even after everything. The line suddenly went quiet for several seconds before Derek spoke again. Tomorrow you'll ask her to meet with the financial consultant. No. You're doing it. No, Derek. I had never heard my daughter sound that small before. Then came another sound. Sharp. Sudden. A crash, maybe. Or a hand striking furniture? I couldn't tell. But Vanessa gasped in fear immediately afterward, and every maternal instinct inside me exploded at once. Don't scare me like that, she whispered shakily. My blood turned ice cold. Derek didn't answer for several seconds. When he finally did, his voice had become dangerously soft. I'm the only person trying to save this family? No. No, he wasn't. He was trying to save himself from consequences. There's a difference. The call disconnected abruptly a few moments later. I sat frozen in bed, staring into darkness long after the screen went black. Then slowly, very slowly, something inside me changed. Until that moment, part of me still hoped this nightmare could somehow dissolve quietly. That maybe enough love and patience could untangle everything before real damage happened. But now I understood something clearly. Derek wasn't desperate anymore. He was dangerous. And Vanessa, my beautiful little girl, was drowning beside him. I climbed out of bed and walked into the hallway with trembling legs. The house felt colder than usual. I stopped in front of Frank's photograph again. You were right, I whispered tearfully. I should have seen him sooner. At 4 in the morning, I called Gloria despite the hour. She answered groggily. Shari, I need help, I whispered. My voice cracked completely then, because saying the next words aloud made everything irreversible. I think my daughter's husband is trying to steal my life. By 8 the next morning, Gloria was sitting at my kitchen table with legal pads spread everywhere while I replayed the late-night recording for the third time. The more we listened, the worse it sounded. Not emotional panic, not temporary desperation. Planning. Careful, deliberate planning. Gloria paused the recording right after Derek said, "One more evaluation, and we can push for supervised financial oversight." She removed her glasses slowly. That sentence alone changes everything. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup just to stop them from shaking. What do I do now? You stop reacting emotionally, Gloria said firmly, and you start thinking strategically. Strategic. I hated that word suddenly. Families weren't supposed to require strategy. But Gloria was right. If Derek was willing to build a legal narrative around my supposed incompetence, then crying and pleading would only make me look exactly the way he wanted. Weak, confused, emotional. I straightened slightly in my chair. What's the first step? You need a lawyer. The thought made my stomach tighten immediately. Not because Gloria was wrong, but because involving attorneys meant admitting this situation had officially crossed into war. Still by noon that day, Gloria had arranged a meeting with someone she trusted, Michael Turner. His office sat inside an old brick building downtown above a bakery that smelled faintly like cinnamon and coffee. Somehow the ordinary smell comforted me, while everything else in my life felt unstable. Michael greeted us calmly. He looked to be in his early 60s, silver-haired and serious, without seeming cold. After introductions, Gloria handed him copies of everything. The clinic paperwork, the lending notices, the business filings connected to Derek, and finally, my phone recording. Michael listened silently, with his hands folded together beneath his chin. He didn't interrupt once. When the recording ended, the room remained quiet for several seconds. Then he asked me one question. Mrs. Diaz, do you want the truth or reassurance? I swallowed hard. The truth. His expression softened slightly. Your instincts are correct. Your son-in-law appears to be laying groundwork for financial control. Even though I already knew hearing it spoken professionally still hurt. Michael continued carefully. Legally speaking, people often begin these processes gradually. Medical evaluations, family concern documentation, suggestions that an elderly relative is vulnerable or declining. I stared down at my hands. I'm not declining. I know that. His voice remained calm. but courts see many legitimate elder abuse cases. Unfortunately, manipulative people sometimes weaponize those same systems. Weaponize? Yes, that was exactly what this felt like. Michael leaned forward slightly. The good news is that Derek has moved too quickly. I looked up. What does that mean he's becoming reckless? The recordings help you enormously. Relief flickered faintly inside me for the first time in weeks, but it disappeared almost immediately. What about Vanessa? Michael paused carefully. That's more complicated. Of course it was, because every terrible thing Derek did still carried my daughter's fingerprints too. She participated in the evaluations, Michael said gently. That matters legally. The shame hit me again like a physical ache. I closed my eyes briefly. She's scared of him, probably Michael agreed. But frightened people can still become involved in financial exploitation. That sentence stayed with me painfully, because it forced me to face something I kept emotionally avoiding. Vanessa was both victim and participant, and loving her wouldn't change that fact. Michael slid a yellow legal pad toward me. Right now, you need to protect yourself immediately. Together, we made another list. Update legal documents. Assign independent medical oversight if necessary. Remove any shared account access. Document all conversations. Avoid signing anything. And finally, do not confront Derek emotionally. That last instruction surprised me. Why? Because manipulative individuals thrive on emotional reactions. Calm documentation terrifies them far more. Gloria nodded immediately. He expects guilt and tears. He doesn't expect preparation. Michael looked directly at me. Mrs. Diaz, the safest thing you can do now is let Derek believe his plan is still working. A chill ran through me. You want me to pretend I want you to gather evidence. The word evidence made this feel criminal in a way my heart still struggled accepting. But deep down, I knew Michael was right, because Derek wasn't going to stop voluntarily. Men drowning in debt rarely walk away from lifeboats, and my house had become his lifeboat. By late afternoon, the beginnings of a plan formed. I would agree to meet Derek's financial advisor. I would appear uncertain, open-minded, maybe even vulnerable, and meanwhile, Michael would quietly prepare legal protections behind the scenes. I hated every second of it. But survival sometimes requires performance. Around 6 that evening, Vanessa called unexpectedly. My pulse jumped instantly. Michael motioned for calm, while Gloria quietly started taking notes beside me. I answered carefully. Hi, sweetheart. Vanessa sounded exhausted. Mom, are you busy? Number long silence. Then she whispered, Derek says we should all meet this weekend to talk. There it was. The next step. I forced my voice to remain steady. Talk about what you know. She hesitated painfully. Future planning. Not refinancing, not debt. Future planning. Everybody kept renaming the same threat. I glanced at Michael. He nodded once slowly, so I took a deep breath and said the words that tasted like poison. Maybe that's a good idea. Silence exploded on the line. Vanessa sounded genuinely shocked. You mean that? Yes. My chest hurt while saying it. I've been thinking a lot lately. Behind me, Gloria scribbled notes quickly. Vanessa exhaled shakily. Then for the first time in weeks, I heard something dangerous in her voice. Hope. Not happiness. Relief. As though she believed disaster might finally be avoided. That realization broke my heart again. Because despite everything, some part of my daughter still desperately wanted this nightmare to end peacefully too. When should we meet? I asked. Saturday afternoon. Okay. Another silence followed. Then Vanessa whispered very softly, Thank you, Mom. The gratitude in her voice sounded so genuine that tears instantly burned behind my eyes. God help me. I still wanted to protect her, even now. After the call ended, Michael leaned back thoughtfully. She's conflicted. She's terrified, I whispered. Yes. He studied me carefully. Which makes her unpredictable? That frightened me more than Derek somehow. because I understood Derek now. Greed, control, desperation. But Vanessa still lived emotionally in the gray area between guilt and fear, and desperate people make dangerous decisions. Before leaving, Michael gave me one final piece of advice. When Saturday comes, let Derek speak as much as possible. Why? Because narcissistic people eventually expose themselves when they think they've regained control. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the old family photograph hanging near the refrigerator. Frank stood behind Vanessa with his hands resting proudly on her shoulders. She couldn't have been older than 23 in that picture. Still soft-faced, still hopeful, still untouched by whatever Derek eventually became in her life. I touched the frame gently. "I'm trying," I whispered to Frank. "I'm trying to save her without losing myself." But somewhere deep inside, another painful truth was beginning to settle in quietly. Sometimes you cannot save people by protecting them from consequences. Sometimes the only thing left to save is yourself. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I was finally ready to fight back. Saturday arrived gray and cold, the kind of Ohio afternoon where the sky hangs low and heavy like it's carrying bad news. I spent the morning cleaning my kitchen, even though it was already spotless. Nervous energy needs somewhere to go, and scrubbing counters felt safer than thinking. By 1 o'clock, Michael had already arrived quietly through the back entrance. He wouldn't sit at the table with us. Instead, he remained in the den just down the hallway, where he could hear everything clearly without being visible immediately. Gloria sat beside him with a legal pad and copies of every document we'd collected so far. The plan was simple. Stay calm. Let Derek talk. Do not interrupt too early. Allow him enough confidence to expose himself fully. I hated it already. Because despite everything, part of me still desperately wanted this meeting to end, with Vanessa breaking down and apologizing, and the whole nightmare somehow dissolving into tears and healing. But real life rarely gives older women fairy tales. At exactly 2:15, Derek's SUV pulled into my driveway. I watched through the kitchen curtain as Vanessa climbed out slowly behind him. Even from inside the house, I could see tension in the way she held herself. Derek, meanwhile, looked almost cheerful. That frightened me. Confident predators are dangerous. I opened the door before they knocked. "Hi, Mom," Vanessa whispered. She hugged me tightly, too tightly, and for one brief second, I felt her trembling. Then Derek stepped forward carrying a leather briefcase. There it was. The real reason for the visit. Not concern. Not family discussion. Paperwork. "Thanks for meeting with us, Shari," he said warmly. I stepped aside silently. The three of us moved into the kitchen, where I had already set out coffee cups none of us would really drink. Vanessa sat near the edge of the table, while Derek positioned himself directly across from me, like a businessman preparing negotiations. That detail alone hurt. This used to be the table where Vanessa decorated Christmas cookies with Frank. Now it looked like a bank meeting. For several minutes, Derek made small talk about weather and traffic. I realized quickly that he was trying to reestablish emotional normalcy before introducing the documents. Classic manipulation. People comply more easily when tension feels softened first. Finally, Derek unclasped the leather briefcase. My heartbeat immediately accelerated. "I know recent conversations have been stressful," he began smoothly, "but I truly believe this could help everyone move forward peacefully." He removed several folders carefully and lined them up across the table. Too organized. Too prepared. Vanessa stared at the papers like they physically hurt her. I forced myself to remain calm. "What exactly am I looking at?" "Mostly precautionary planning," Derek answered. Precautionary. Another harmless word hiding danger. He slid the first document toward me. Power of attorney authorization. My stomach turned instantly. "You want control over my finances." "No." Derek smiled patiently. "Not control. Assistance if emergencies ever arise." I looked at Vanessa. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. My chest tightened painfully. Derek continued talking before silence could grow dangerous. This protects families from confusion later. Families. Always families. As though every selfish thing he wanted somehow represented collective love. I picked up the next document slowly. Home Equity Access Proposal. There it was. No more pretending. No more vague discussions about planning. They wanted my house tied to their debt. How much money are you asking for? I asked quietly. Derek folded his hands together. Technically, the equity would secure refinancing flexibility. That's not an answer. Something flickered across his face briefly. Annoyance. He recovered quickly. Around 400,000. Vanessa closed her eyes immediately. I nearly dropped the papers. $400,000. Frank and I spent decades building everything we owned. Years of skipped vacations, second jobs, careful budgeting, and Derek was asking for it in one afternoon. I looked directly at my daughter. You knew tears immediately filled her eyes. Mom. But Derek interrupted smoothly. This isn't theft, Shari. The audacity of that sentence stunned me. No. My voice shook despite my efforts. Then what exactly would you call risking a widow's paid-off home to save your collapsing business? Derek leaned forward slightly. I'd call it family helping family. There it was again. The weaponized version of loyalty. I noticed something important then. He never once apologized. Not for the clinic, not for the paperwork, not for the manipulation. Because somewhere inside himself, Derek truly believed he deserved access to my life. That realization chilled me more deeply than anger ever could. I set the documents down carefully. And if you fail, we won't. That's not what I asked. Derek's jaw tightened. We have opportunities coming. Do you— Silence? The air shifted instantly. For the first time since arriving, Derek looked uncertain whether I was still under his influence. Good. Michael was right. Confident manipulators unravel once control slips unexpectedly. I leaned back slowly. How many lawsuits exist against your company right now? Vanessa gasped softly. Derek froze completely. Just for a second, but it was enough. Who told you that? He asked quietly. Interesting. Not denial, not confusion, fear. I folded my hands calmly. Answer the question. His face hardened slightly. Business disputes happen constantly. How many? No answer. Vanessa started crying silently beside him, and suddenly Derek lost patience. You think I wanted this? He snapped. There it was, the real man finally emerging. No, I replied softly. I think you thought you'd never get caught. The silence afterward felt electric. Derek stared at me with something cold behind his eyes now. The warmth was gone. The patient son-in-law act had cracked open. You don't understand pressure, he muttered bitterly. I almost laughed. I buried my husband after 42 years of marriage. His jaw tightened. I worked double shifts while Frank recovered from surgery. I survived cancer. I raised a child while balancing bills you've never even imagined. I leaned forward slightly. Do not tell me I don't understand pressure. Vanessa suddenly covered her face with both hands and sobbed openly. Stop, she whispered brokenly. Please stop. But Derek wasn't stopping anymore. Because desperate people eventually reveal themselves. You're sitting in a paid-off house while everybody else drowns? He exploded suddenly. There it was. Entitlement. Raw and ugly. You have all this equity just sitting here while we lose everything. Interesting how the language shifted back and forth whenever convenient. I stared at him carefully. So you decided my age made me easier to manipulate? His eyes widened slightly. I never said that. No, I replied quietly. You just arranged cognitive evaluations and discussed controlling me behind my back. Vanessa looked up instantly, horror flooding her face. Derek turned toward her sharply. You told her. No, she cried immediately. That reaction alone exposed everything. The room fell into terrible silence. Then Derek looked back at me slowly, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he realized I knew far more than he ever intended. I stood carefully from the table. You should leave now. Fear flashed briefly across Derek's face, because suddenly the meeting no longer felt controlled. And somewhere in the den behind the hallway, Michael Turner quietly prepared to walk into the light. The silence after my words felt almost alive. You should leave now. Derek remained frozen in his chair for half a second too long. That hesitation told me everything. He was calculating, trying to decide how much danger he was suddenly in. Vanessa sat beside him, trembling openly now, mascara streaking down her cheeks, while the untouched coffee between us grew cold. Then Derek slowly stood. His voice became calm again too quickly. Dangerously calm. Shari. I think emotions are clouding this conversation. There it was. The old strategy returning. Women were emotional. Older women were confused. And Derek, of course, remained the only rational person in the room. Before I could answer, another voice came from the hallway behind us. I actually think Mrs. Diaz sounds perfectly clear. Derek turned sharply. Michael stepped into the kitchen calmly, with Gloria beside him, holding a folder against her chest. For the first time since I'd known him, Derek Morales truly looked frightened. Not stressed. Not irritated. Afraid. What the hell is this? He demanded. Michael remained composed. My name is Michael Turner. I represent Mrs. Diaz. The color drained visibly from Derek's face. Vanessa looked back and forth between all of us like she couldn't fully process what was happening. I almost pitied her. Almost. Because this was the moment illusions finally collapse. The moment secrets stop hiding in darkness. Derek laughed once under his breath, but the sound carried no confidence. You had a lawyer hiding in the house, Michael answered evenly. Given recent discussions about competency concerns and financial control, Mrs. Diaz felt it would be wise. Competency concerns. Hearing those words spoken professionally made Derek visibly tense. He knew exactly what they implied. Gloria stepped forward next. We also documented the clinic paperwork. Derek's eyes narrowed instantly. You recorded us? Michael corrected him calmly. No. Mrs. Diaz documented conversations occurring in her own home and retained copies of documents voluntarily presented to her. Every word sounded deliberate, legal, careful. Derek suddenly looked toward Vanessa with something dangerously close to blame. You told them too much? Vanessa flinched like she'd been struck. And that was it. That was the moment my daughter finally broke completely. No, she whispered. Then louder. No. She stood up abruptly, chair scraping harshly against the kitchen floor. I didn't tell them anything, she cried. You did this yourself. The room went silent again. Derek stared at her in disbelief. Vanessa pressed trembling hands against her face, trying unsuccessfully to stop sobbing. I can't do this anymore. My chest tightened painfully, because beneath all the betrayal and lies, she still sounded like my little girl. Derek's voice lowered into something sharp and controlled. Vanessa, sit down. Every instinct inside me reacted instantly to that tone. Not husband, commander. Vanessa froze automatically, and suddenly, everybody in the kitchen understood the same thing at once. Fear had been living in my daughter's marriage for a very long time. Michael spoke carefully. Mrs. Morales, nobody here is forcing you to say anything. Derek shot him a furious look. This is a family conversation. No, Michael replied evenly. This became a legal matter the moment cognitive manipulation and financial coercion entered the picture. The word coercion seemed to hit Vanessa physically. She began crying harder. Derek turned toward her immediately. Don't start exaggerating. That sentence changed everything for me. Not comforting, not concern, control. Always control. Vanessa slowly lowered her hands from her face and looked directly at him for the first time all afternoon. You told me we were borrowing temporarily. Derek's jaw tightened. We were. You lied. I adapted to changing circumstances. The coldness of that answer stunned even Gloria. Vanessa stared at him like she was finally seeing someone clearly after years of fog. You used me. No, he snapped immediately. I protected us. Us. Again, that shifting language, always reshaping reality into whatever best served him. Vanessa shook her head weakly. You made me tell doctors my mother was confused. You agreed with the concerns. I agreed because you said we'd lose everything. Her voice cracked violently on the last word. And suddenly, the truth began pouring out of her like water breaking through a dam. He kept saying, we only needed help for a few months, she whispered toward me through tears. He said investors were panicking, and if we stabilized things temporarily, we could fix everything before you even noticed. I closed my eyes briefly. God. Hearing it aloud hurt even worse than imagining it. Vanessa looked at me desperately. I never wanted to hurt you, Mom. Then why did you? The question screamed inside me. But when I looked at her face, I saw something too broken for cruelty. Exhaustion, shame, fear. Derek suddenly slammed his palm against the counter. This is unbelievable. Everybody jumped slightly, except Michael. You're acting like I held a gun to your head, Derek snapped at Vanessa. No, she whispered shakily. You just controlled everything else. Silence. Heavy. Terrible. And then came the moment that truly shattered me. Vanessa looked at me and said quietly, I gave him your passwords. The room blurred for a second. Not because I didn't suspect it. Because hearing your child confess betrayal feels physical, like something tearing internally. Vanessa began speaking faster now, panic and guilt colliding together. After Dad died, you trusted me with everything. Derek said we needed financial records to show lenders temporary assets. He promised nothing would happen to your accounts. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. How long? She started crying again. A year, an entire year. All those dinners, birthday cards, phone calls, and underneath everything this secret. I hate myself, Vanessa whispered. Derek scoffed harshly. Oh, stop. The cruelty of it made Gloria visibly recoil. Vanessa turned toward him slowly. No, you stop. That seemed to shock him more than anything else, because abusers often mistake fear for loyalty, and once fear cracks control, starts collapsing fast. You isolated me from everyone, Vanessa continued shakily. You checked my phone. You monitored my spending. You made me feel guilty every time I questioned you. Derek laughed bitterly. I was trying to save our lives. No, she whispered. You were trying to save your image. The room went still again, because she was right. Derek cared about failure less than humiliation. That explained everything. The expensive condo, the fake confidence, the obsession with appearances. He would rather destroy other people than admit collapse publicly. Michael finally spoke again. Mr. Morales, I strongly recommend you stop discussing financial matters further without legal representation. Derek looked at him coldly. You think this old woman can prove anything, old woman? There it was again, the contempt underneath everything. And suddenly, instead of hurting me, it made something inside me become very calm, because I finally understood something important. Men like Derek only respect power once they lose theirs. I stood slowly from the table. You underestimated me. For the first time since entering my home, Derek had no response. Vanessa looked at me through tears. I'm sorry, Mom. The pain in her voice was real, but so was the damage. And forgiveness, I realized then, was going to be far more complicated than love, because love remembers who people were, but survival remembers what they did. Derek left my house 20 minutes later without saying goodbye, but not before making one final mistake. As he grabbed his briefcase near the front door, he turned toward Vanessa and said through clenched teeth, You're destroying both our lives. Not you embarrassed me. Not this is over. Destroying. because in Derek's mind, consequences were always something other people caused him to suffer. Vanessa didn't answer. She stood near the kitchen doorway, looking hollowed out like someone who had finally escaped a burning building, only to realize everything she owned was still inside. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the picture frames after he left. Silence followed. Heavy. Painful. Nobody moved at first. Then Vanessa slowly sank into one of the kitchen chairs and began crying again quietly this time, like she had exhausted all dramatic emotion and only grief remained. I stayed standing, not because I wanted distance, because I no longer knew how to stand close to my daughter without remembering everything she had hidden from me. Michael broke the silence gently. Mrs. Morales, I strongly recommend you gather personal documents and separate your finances immediately. Vanessa wiped at her swollen eyes weakly. He controls most of the accounts. Michael nodded like he expected that answer. Then we'll help you document everything. We. Such a simple word, but after weeks of manipulation and lies, hearing someone include Vanessa in protection instead of control nearly made me cry myself. Gloria sat beside my daughter carefully. Sweetheart. How bad is it really? Vanessa laughed once bitterly through tears. You mean besides the lawsuits? The room went still. There are more, I asked quietly. She nodded slowly. Much more. Over the next hour, the full nightmare finally unfolded, piece by piece. Not all at once. Trauma never comes out neatly. It spills, stops, starts again. Vanessa told us Derek's business had been failing for almost 2 years. At first, he hid the problems behind optimistic promises and fake confidence. Just temporary setbacks, cash flow issues, delayed investor returns. But eventually, the debts became impossible to hide. He started borrowing constantly. Friends, private investors, credit cards. Then came the tax problems. And after that panic, he became obsessed with appearances, Vanessa whispered. Even after we couldn't afford things anymore, he kept pretending everything was successful. That part I believed immediately. Derek cared deeply about image, probably more than truth itself. He said if people realized we were struggling financially, nobody would ever trust him again. So instead, he decided to trust nobody himself, especially not his wife. Vanessa explained how gradually Derek took over every part of their finances. At first, it sounded practical. He handled investments, business accounts, tax paperwork. Then slowly he started monitoring her spending too, questioning purchases, reading her emails, checking her location. He said stress made me irresponsible, she whispered. Classic. Destroy somebody's confidence slowly enough, and eventually they start borrowing your judgment instead of trusting their own. I looked at my daughter carefully while she spoke. She seemed smaller than I remembered somehow. Not physically, emotionally. Fear shrinks people over time. Then came the part that hurt me most. The first time he mentioned your house. Vanessa's voice cracked. I told him absolutely not. I closed my eyes briefly. Thank God. At least initially she fought him, but Vanessa continued. Then more lawsuits came. He started drinking more. He kept saying we were going to lose everything. Her breathing became shaky again. He said bankruptcy would ruin us forever. Michael asked quietly, did he ever physically hurt you? Vanessa shook her head immediately. No. Then hesitated. Gloria noticed too. What does that mean? She asked gently. Vanessa stared at the table. He never hit me. Never. Not didn't. Never. Another distinction that mattered. But he scared you, I whispered. Tears filled her eyes instantly. Yes. The word nearly shattered me, because suddenly I remembered every warning sign I ignored over the years. The nervous glances, the constant apologizing, the way Vanessa checked Derek's reactions before speaking freely. I should have seen it sooner. A mother is supposed to notice these things. But Michael interrupted my guilt firmly. Manipulative relationships are designed to confuse people, including families. Maybe. But that didn't fully relieve the ache inside me. Vanessa continued talking quietly. At first, he only wanted temporary access to information. He promised we'd never actually use your money. And you believed him? Yes. Why? She looked at me then with tears streaming down her face. Because I was terrified. That answer silenced the room. Fear makes intelligent people irrational. I knew that. I taught children from violent homes for years. I watched frightened mothers defend terrible men simply because survival becomes blurry when you're emotionally trapped. Still, understanding pain does not erase betrayal. Vanessa seemed to sense my conflict immediately. I know you hate me. The words hit hard. Because despite everything I didn't, I was furious, heartbroken, disappointed beyond language. But hate number mothers don't stop loving children just because those children become dangerous to them. That's the tragedy. Love survives even when trust dies. I don't hate you, I said quietly. Vanessa started crying harder. But I don't know how to trust you anymore. The honesty visibly wounded her. Good. Not because I wanted revenge, because truth matters, especially after months of manipulation. Michael eventually stood and closed his folder. I think the immediate priority is legal protection. Practical, grounded, necessary. He outlined the next steps carefully. Financial separation, protective documentation, potential fraud investigations, possible elder exploitation claims. Every sentence made the situation feel more serious, more public, more permanent. Vanessa looked sick by the end of it. What happens if Derek fights this? Michael answered honestly. He probably will. Of course he would. Men like Derek rarely surrender quietly. Control becomes part of their identity eventually. Around sunset, Gloria drove Vanessa back to the condo temporarily so she could collect personal belongings while Derek was supposedly meeting attorneys. Before leaving, Vanessa stopped near my front porch awkwardly. The autumn wind lifted strands of her hair across her wet cheeks. Mom? I waited silently. I know sorry isn't enough. No, it wasn't. Not for the lies, not for the evaluations, not for making me doubt my own mind. But looking at her standing there, trembling like a lost child, I also knew punishment alone wouldn't heal either of us. So instead, I asked the only question that still mattered. Did you ever truly believe I was confused? Vanessa looked horrified instantly. No. The answer came fast. Honest. Never. I searched her face carefully, and for the first time in weeks, I believed her completely. That mattered more than she probably understood, because it meant somewhere beneath all the manipulation and fear, my daughter still knew who I really was. After Gloria drove away with her, I stood alone on my porch, watching darkness settle over the neighborhood. My house felt strangely quiet now. Not peaceful, just exhausted. Michael paused beside me before leaving too. You did well today. I almost laughed. My family exploded in my kitchen. Yes, he said gently, but you survived the truth. The truth. Funny how people think truth sets you free immediately. Sometimes truth destroys everything first. Then slowly, if you're lucky, it helps you rebuild something more honest afterward. As I locked my front door that night, I realized something important. Derek came into my life believing older women were easy to silence, easy to manipulate, easy to erase. But he forgot something dangerous. Women who survive long enough eventually learn the difference between kindness and surrender. And I was finally done surrendering. The next month passed like a storm that refused to fully leave town. Even on quiet mornings, I felt tension lingering in the air, like humidity before rain. Derek did exactly what Michael predicted. He fought everything. At first through lawyers, then through anger, then through reputation. Men who build their identities around control rarely accept humiliation gracefully. 3 days after the confrontation at my house, Michael called me with the first update. Derek retained legal counsel, he said calmly over the phone. I stood at my kitchen sink, gripping the counter tightly. What does that mean? It means he's attempting damage control. That turned out to be an understatement. Within 2 weeks, several ugly rumors began floating quietly through our church community and social circles. Poor Sherry is becoming paranoid lately. She's confused about financial matters. Vanessa's just trying to help her mother. I recognized Derek's fingerprints immediately. Subtle, respectable, carefully crafted, because outright attacks would expose him too openly. But whispers. Whispers spread beautifully, especially about older women. Society already expects aging women to become emotional, forgetful, unstable. Derek understood that. What he didn't understand was that I had stopped being ashamed of defending myself. So when Marilyn Cooper nervously asked one afternoon whether I was doing okay mentally, I looked her directly in the eye and answered calmly, "I'm doing well enough to hire attorneys against financial exploitation." The gossip changed direction after that. Fast. Meanwhile, Vanessa officially moved out of the condo. That part hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted her marriage saved, because watching your child carry garbage bags full of clothes into a temporary apartment feels like watching them walk through the wreckage of their own life. Gloria helped her move while I stayed home pretending to organize paperwork. The truth was simpler. I wasn't ready to see her suffering up close yet. Love and anger were still fighting constantly inside me. Some mornings I missed her so badly I could barely breathe. Other mornings I remembered the clinic forms and felt physically sick. Healing isn't linear, especially betrayal between mothers and daughters. One rainy Thursday evening, Vanessa finally came over alone again. This time she looked different. Still exhausted, still fragile, but quieter somehow, like someone finally emerging from constant noise. I led her inside carefully. Not warmly, not coldly, just carefully. That's the thing nobody tells you about rebuilding trust. It doesn't begin with hugs. It begins with caution. Vanessa sat at the kitchen table while I made tea. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered softly, "Derek emptied one of our accounts." I froze. What, he moved money before I left? Anger flashed through me instantly. How much? Almost everything. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course he did. Control rarely ends cleanly. Vanessa wrapped trembling hands around her teacup. "He keeps texting me." "What does he want?" She laughed bitterly. "To remind me I ruined his life." The old version of me might have softened immediately, but trauma changes people too. "He ruined his own life," I said quietly. Vanessa looked down. "I know." And for the first time since all this began, I believe she truly understood that. She slowly pulled something from her purse. A folder. I brought copies of everything I could find. Bank statements, emails, loan documents. There were even messages from Derek pressuring her to keep your mother cooperative. Reading those words made my stomach twist violently. Cooperative. Like I was an animal needing management. Vanessa watched my face carefully while I read. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. I finally looked up. "Stop apologizing for 1 minute." She blinked in surprise. "Start explaining." That seemed harder for her somehow. Because apologies are emotional. Explanations require honesty. Vanessa wiped at her eyes slowly. "At first, I thought I was helping my husband survive." She stared into her tea. "Then I started helping him hide things." Silence filled the kitchen, and eventually she whispered, "I became scared to disagree with him at all." There it was, the gradual erosion. That's how controlling relationships work. Not usually through one dramatic moment, through tiny compromises repeated until someone barely recognizes themselves anymore. "I used to rehearse conversations before calling you, Vanessa," admitted quietly. Pain tightened in my chest. Why? Because Derek hated when I sounded too emotional with you. I almost laughed at the cruelty of that. A daughter sounding emotional with her mother, as if love itself became suspicious to him. Vanessa continued speaking slowly, like every truth physically hurt coming out. "He monitored my spending, checked my messages, questioned every friendship." Her voice cracked. "And somehow I still kept defending him." That part I understood more than she realized. Not because I ever lived her exact experience, but because women of my generation were raised to preserve relationships even while drowning inside them. We were taught endurance before boundaries, sacrifice before self protection, and manipulative men know exactly how to weaponize that conditioning. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked softly. Tears filled her eyes immediately. Because once I helped with the clinic paperwork, she shook her head weakly. I felt too ashamed. Shame. That word explained everything. Shame traps people almost as effectively as fear. I sat down across from her slowly. For the record, I said quietly, those papers nearly destroyed me. Vanessa broke completely then. I know. No, I replied softly. I don't think you fully do. She looked up at me through tears. When your own child starts helping people question your mind, my throat tightened painfully. You start questioning yourself too. The horror on her face told me she had never truly understood that damage before. Good. Not because I wanted revenge, because accountability matters, especially inside families. Vanessa cried silently for several minutes before whispering, I thought if we fixed the money problems fast enough, nobody would ever get hurt. That sentence stayed with me, because most terrible family betrayals don't begin with evil. They begin with rationalization, temporary lies, shortcuts, fear. Then suddenly, people wake up standing inside devastation they helped create. Around 9 that night, Vanessa prepared to leave. At the front door, she hesitated awkwardly. Michael thinks investigators may contact me soon. They probably will. She nodded weakly. I'll cooperate. I studied her carefully. Good. Not warm approval, just truth. Before stepping outside, Vanessa turned back toward me one last time. I know I don't deserve this right now. Her voice trembled, but I miss my mom. The words nearly shattered me, because despite everything I miss my daughter too, I just didn't fully know who she was anymore. After she left, I locked the front door and leaned against it heavily. The house felt quieter these days. Not lonely exactly, just changed. Like me. I walked slowly through the hallway and stopped again near Frank's photograph. You would have hated all this, I whispered, but deep down, I knew something else too. Frank also would have been proud of me, because after months of manipulation, fear, and betrayal, I was finally protecting myself without apologizing for it. And at 68 years old, that might have been the bravest thing I'd ever learned to do. Spring arrived quietly that year. After months of cold rain, legal paperwork, and sleepless nights, I almost didn't trust the sunlight when it finally returned. The maple tree Frank planted decades ago had started blooming again outside my kitchen window. Tiny green leaves stretched carefully toward the sky, like they were uncertain whether winter was truly over. I understood the feeling. 6 months had passed since Derek walked out of my house for the last time. In the end, reality caught up with him faster than charm could save him. Investigators uncovered financial fraud tied to several of his business accounts. Multiple investors filed civil claims, and one lender formally accused him of falsifying financial disclosures. Michael handled most of the legal details for me, because honestly, by then I was emotionally exhausted. I didn't celebrate Derek's collapse. That surprised some people, but when you live long enough, you realize destruction rarely feels satisfying up close. Even when someone deserves consequences, there's still sadness in watching a human being destroy himself piece by piece, especially when your daughter once loved him. Vanessa finalized the divorce 3 months after leaving the condo. The first weeks afterward were ugly. She cried often, barely ate, jumped whenever her phone buzzed. Trauma leaves echoes inside people long after danger disappears. But slowly, very slowly, I started seeing signs of life returning to her again. Real life, not fearful survival. She found a smaller apartment across town near the dental office, where she still worked. Nothing fancy, just a modest 1 bedroom with cheap carpeting and too little sunlight. The first time I visited, she apologized repeatedly for how plain it looked. I surprised both of us with my answer. Peace matters more than granite countertops. Vanessa cried after I said that, not dramatically, just silently. Because for years, Derek convinced her appearances mattered more than emotional safety, and now she was beginning to understand how wrong that was. Healing between us happened slowly too, painfully slowly. Some wounds do not close because people say sorry. They close because trust is rebuilt through consistency over time. At first, our conversations felt careful, polite, measured, like strangers learning each other again. But gradually, little pieces of normal life returned. Phone calls about recipes, texts about weather, complaints about grocery prices. Tiny, ordinary moments that once seemed insignificant suddenly became precious again. One Saturday morning in April, Vanessa came over wearing old jeans and gardening gloves. I thought maybe we could fix the backyard together, she said softly. For a second, emotion caught painfully in my throat, because Frank and I spent years building that garden, and Vanessa used to help us when she was little, carrying tiny watering cans twice her size. So we worked quietly, side by side, all afternoon. No dramatic speeches, no forced healing, just dirt beneath our fingernails and sunlight warming our backs while we replanted flowers winter had killed. At one point, Vanessa stopped near the rose bushes and whispered, "I almost lost you." The honesty in her voice hurt more than tears would have. I set down my gardening tools slowly. "Yes," I answered truthfully. "You almost did." She nodded like she needed to hear it spoken aloud. I still don't fully understand how I became that person. I looked at my daughter carefully. "You didn't become one person overnight, sweetheart." She frowned slightly. "What do you mean I brushed dirt gently from my hands?" Bad relationships change people gradually. One compromise at a time, one excuse at a time. By the time you realize who you've become, I sighed softly. "You're already lost." Tears filled her eyes immediately. "But you found your way back." That mattered too, because not everyone does. Vanessa started therapy shortly after the divorce. At first, she seemed embarrassed talking about it like needing emotional help meant weakness. Women our generation carry strange shame around healing. But over time, I noticed changes. She spoke more clearly, laughed more naturally, stopped apologizing every 5 minutes. One evening over dinner, she admitted something that stayed with me. I used to think love meant enduring anything. I looked at her quietly across the table, and now she smiled sadly. "Now I think love should feel safe." God. I wish someone had taught women that decades earlier. As for me, life changed too. Not dramatically, but deeply. I updated every legal document I owned, changed passwords, created proper protections, not because I became paranoid, because I became wiser. There's a difference. I also stopped apologizing for boundaries. That may sound small to younger people, but women my age were often raised to believe kindness required endless sacrifice. Now I understood something different. Love without boundaries eventually becomes permission for mistreatment, and older women especially are taught to shrink themselves emotionally for the comfort of others. No more. One afternoon, Gloria asked me whether I regretted fighting back. The answer came instantly: no. Then, after a pause, I added quietly, "But I regret needing to." That was the truth. I never wanted war with my daughter. I never wanted lawyers sitting in my kitchen or investigators reviewing family finances. I simply wanted honesty, respect, safety, the things every aging parent deserves. By early summer, Vanessa began coming over every Sunday again, just like old times. Sometimes we cooked together. Sometimes we watched old movies Frank loved. Sometimes we simply sat on the back porch, listening to birds while evening settled softly around us. The trust between us still wasn't identical to before. Maybe it never would be. Certain betrayals permanently change relationships, but changed does not always mean destroyed. One warm evening, Vanessa and I sat beside the restored flower beds, watching fireflies flicker across the yard. "They're beautiful," she whispered. I smiled softly. Your father loved this time of year. We sat quietly for a while before Vanessa finally turned toward me. Mom, yes. Why did you forgive me? The question lingered gently between us. I thought carefully before answering, because forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. She listened silently. I forgave you because carrying hatred would destroy me too. I looked out toward the garden, but rebuilding trust, that takes time and truth. Vanessa nodded slowly with tears in her eyes. I'll spend the rest of my life earning that. Maybe she would. Maybe that's what real accountability looks like. Not dramatic guilt, steady change. As darkness settled around us, I suddenly realized something important. The voice message that once nearly destroyed my life had also saved it. Because without hearing those accidental words, I might have continued ignoring the warning signs until it was too late. Sometimes painful truth arrives disguised as disaster. And sometimes surviving betrayal teaches you the value of your own voice. At 68 years old, I finally learned that protecting yourself does not make you cruel. It makes you wise, and wisdom, unlike fear, is something nobody can steal from you. After everything that happened, I spent a long time thinking about how easily love can blind us when it comes to family. Many of us, especially mothers, believe sacrifice is proof of love. We excuse disrespect because we want peace. And we ignore warning signs because we're afraid of losing the people we care about. And sometimes, little by little, we give away our boundaries until we barely recognize ourselves anymore. What happened to me taught me something painful but necessary. Love without honesty becomes dangerous, and kindness without boundaries invites manipulation. For a long time, I thought protecting my daughter meant protecting her from consequences. But real love is not covering up harm. Real love tells the truth, even when the truth hurts. Real love refuses to participate in destruction. I also learned that growing older does not make us weak. Society often treats elderly people like burdens, like our opinions matter less, or our independence is temporary. But age is not incompetence. Experience is not weakness. Older people deserve dignity, protection, and respect, not control disguised as concern. And to anyone listening who may feel trapped inside a relationship built on fear, guilt, or manipulation, please remember this. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to protect yourself. And you are never too old to reclaim your voice. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to set painful boundaries with someone you love? And where are you watching from today? Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy emotional family stories like this. Thank you for spending this time with me, and please take care of your heart.